Welcome to Inaudible. My name is Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by my co host, Nithin Ready. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful channeled messages found in the archives of organizations like LL Research, Circle R, and others. The archives contain transcripts of messages from allegedly discarnate sources who articulate a philosophy of spiritual evolution. If you would like an audio version of the transcripts, please subscribe to Ryan Masterson's podcast, Living Love and Light, available on all platforms. Nithin and I will try to provide analysis and commentary on the philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes, and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Hey, Nithin, how's it going, man?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. We're just in the final days of getting everything settled for our first overseas vacation in like 3 years, I guess.
Oh,
So
wow.
going to Germany
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah. Going to go hiking and have a good time.
Well, that sounds amazing. I mean, what I'm gearing up for is not nearly as exciting, but it's pretty significant in my life. We're having our first, not first, but the first time in like 3 years, fantasy football live draft. You know, with COVID, we could never justify having the live draft, but now it's back on. So I'm excited, especially after last year's loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Devastating, I know. Well, I hope you make some money.
Yes, me too.
All right. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. And thanks for joining me on short notice. I wanted to do one more episode before I go on vacation for 2 weeks. And so this is really helpful. The question or the session that we're dealing with is October 3rd, 2009. Now, this is a little bit different than what we normally do because this is a session from I guess like an intermediate channeling circle. Carla and Jim were doing channeling intensives in 2009. And that's kind of where I'm at in my read through of the archive. And so there's a lot of these sessions, and some of them are like, you're just practicing, you're trying to get the hang of it. That's fine. But some of them are quite profound. And it's one of the first times that you start to hear in a long time in the archive, you start to hear from different instruments and get different articulations on things. So given that the topic of this session is all about kind of the mysteries of service, the paradoxes involved in service, I thought it'd be good. It'd probably be a short episode too. We can just rehash some things that we've said before about service and put some like interesting twists on it. So here is the question for Kuo. The question tonight is about the dynamic between actually being of service to others and being able to perceive that we are being in service to others. The example that L gives is of people coming up to her on the street when she has no money to give. Elle is one of the people involved in this circle at this time. She doesn't know how to be generous when she has no money. She could give them a ring, but they could not take the ring and get what they want, which is a drink. And it disturbs her that she is somehow not being generous. We would like to have any spiritual principles that you could give us to think about in considering the true desire to be completely of service to people and where the rubber hits the road on how you behave in a service to others. Now, I just want to say right off the bat, I think this cuts to the nub of what I often put a lot of energy and attention on, which is, am I being service to others in a given task, or am I being service to self? And it's comforting that it's as opaque to others as it is to me. And what I think is great about this session is they're going to really chew on that concept and give us some ideas of how to think of our service so that it's not this constant judgment of ourselves and this constant placing of the attention on ourselves as the thing that's important. Do you have any thoughts before we jump into the channel part, Nithin?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
I love this session. I love this question. Yeah, and for the record, you chose this without any input from me, so wonderful. Uh, so I guess in general, whenever there's something that comes up, and I use this often in the workplace, there's a specific situation, and then there's the general version of that situation. Um, So, I think the general version of this is how to be of service to others, maybe in any given situation. The specific one is a contact with a homeless person. With the specific situation, I just want to say that um, I'm especially. I think I'll have a maybe not a different perspective, but a different experience because this is one area where I actually don't feel like I have issues. It's not these sorts of interactions typically are not very catalytic for me. I think that's true for a number of reasons. Is I work with homeless on a weekly basis. I think I've had many past lives where I was like a homeless yogi or friar that relied on the generosity of others. Um, I also want to say that I feel like sometimes, at least, I know people who they judge the homeless, sometimes feeling like they're lazy or they don't wish to work. Um, Whether or not that's true, I think you, even if that's true, right? Theoretically speaking, it doesn't mean their life is easy. You live on the streets. You have no protection. You're subject to the weather, crime. It's a hard life. And one thing to understand is even if a person at some level wants or desires or is attracting that homeless life, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rational decision or that they truly believe it's the best thing for them. I usually view it more of, at least when we're talking about like homeless in America, not necessarily like the yogi in India who chooses to be homeless, or the growing number of, I guess, Gen Z and millennials who will go homeless, right, busing across the U.S. I'm not talking about that, but I think when you're talking about the homeless in America, it's usually a result of some sort of like distortions as well as obviously economic conditions, right? It's not some choice really. Um, and I also just want to say that in my experience, and this is also why this specific question, is so great. Uh, in my experience, a lot of the homeless are dealing with a lot of mental health issues, drug issues. Um, Obviously, you could go into correlation versus cause and effect, but I think it's a bit of both. And also, registered sex offenders, they have a really difficult time finding employment and also housing, so they're often, you know they end up being homeless. And one other thing, without getting into the, I think nowadays everything can be a political issue, but one thing that I think the statistics are clear on, and people can discuss or debate why, homelessness is generally speaking, at least in the U.S., it's a male oriented issue. The statistics are, for women who are homeless, they're just fewer, much significantly fewer for whatever reason. So anyway, I really like this question. I hope at one point in my life I'll be able to do more for homeless, but I'm currently uh, also on a board member of a nonprofit that basically we kind of help out homeless people. So I love this question, and yeah, let's get right into the specifics.
Okay, so here is Kuo responding to that question. You ask this evening concerning one of the most subtle points of practicing a service to others polarity. You ask concerning the dynamic betwixt the most sincere and wholehearted intention of being of service and the manifestation or demonstration of the qualities of being in service, such as generosity. The reason it is a subtle point is that in that attempting to be of service of others, you are attempting to express unconditional love in an illusion which is filled with conditions. Were we to be speaking with a fourth density or fifth density group of seekers, there would be no distance between the intention to be of service to others and the manifestation or demonstration acted out in everyday life. Within a higher density, you as a student of love and wisdom and unity would have free access to the desires of all those about you. There would be a path of service desired that would be congruent with this path of service possible, and the path of service which you would then find easy and effortless to manifest. The incredible convenience of being able to see the patterns of energy transfer between yourself and others is a great benefit, certainly. Yet the serving of others, because of its ease, does not polarize you as a student to the extent that it polarizes you as a third density student of love, wisdom, and unity. For you can see dimly into the nuances of your intention to be of service, and you can hear the requests made of you to be of service to others, which others offer you. Yet you cannot see into the hearts and the spiritual intentions of those who ask for your service. You cannot know if that which is requested is that which is honestly desired. You are working by faith alone to know yourself and to give of yourself in a way that will be of true service to another. All right. Any thoughts on that section, Nithin?
Um, yeah, it's really hard to know in some situations, when there's someone who's homeless and is asking for something, what to do. I personally don't struggle too much with it, except in situations where they're either clearly high on drugs at the time that they're actually talking to me, um, or there's just some sort of energy of violence about them where you're worried about actually even interacting with them. But the thing is, it's really difficult to know for sure whether you're bringing your biases and prejudices onto the interaction that may occur, or whether they're actually just normal and fine to talk to, and you're just not seeing things for how it is. It's just really hard in this illusion to really know what's going on, you know, um, and at least when I interact, I don't always have money, right? So sometimes I just try to provide acknowledgement, and this is
Yeah.
conditioned on the fact that it's not one of those where they look like they're actually high, or I get this energy of violence, or even sometimes the energy of a lot of mental health issues. It kind of, for me, overlaps with just feeling uncomfortable. But sometimes I just try to like acknowledge them and eye to eye contact and just say, "Hey, brother, hey, sister, sorry, I don't have any money." Uh, maybe depending on the situation, if I'm waiting somewhere, I make conversation. If I don't feel like interacting, maybe because of those aforementioned things, just offer a silent prayer. Um, Often though, if we're near a store or something and I'm not in a rush, and I do judge myself when I decide I'm in a rush, but when I'm not in a rush, I'll be like, "Hey, I can just buy you something. Do you want something?" And just grab them something. Uh, and if I have cash, I usually give it to. I have no problem giving it to them. I think one time, and this is just a laundry list of things. Once again, specific situation. We'll go back to the generalities. I remember seeing this guy who, his I guess he was wearing pants that weren't his or something. His pants were really sagging, and he was like holding it up, and it was actually slowing down how he's walking. And I just gave him my belt. Right, that was not a big deal. I often keep around multiple like cheaper umbrellas in my car because, dude, the one thing that sucks is when it's raining and you're just like sitting in the rain. And a lot of homeless people do that. That just sucks. So I just usually toss them, offer my umbrella. But it's. I don't think you always have to. I think sometimes you don't always have to actually give them something, right? Just physically. Sometimes just your acknowledgement and your what you're giving them is energy, right? But that's not always easily seen, I think, in this illusion. So there's a lot of ways you can go about kind of interacting, I think.
I think that's a big point that Kuo is making here is that in other densities, the environment is not so clouded. And so not only is it clear to you that whatever you're giving them physically is just a approximate conveying device for the energy that's really needed, right? The love that's really needed.
Mm-hmm.
That we can also see into why they need things, what the true spiritual need is that the hunger or the fix is standing in for, right? No, I'm not saying that people aren't hungry. I'm just saying that
It's so cold, man.
yeah, I am saying that we all have problems, and the love that we show each other is designed to help each other get through and process those issues that we're dealing with. In addition, like those of Rob were very clear. To the starving entity, you give them food, no question.
Right.
And that's why I'd like to take this this away from the specific issue of homelessness, because to me that's just a very, very fine point on. It's a very specific example of the kinds of service we are called to do, and I think in a lot of cases, whether or not you help a homeless person is one of the more clear cut cases. I think there's much foggier cases.
Absolutely.
And those are also the times when we'll probably learn a lot more. Um, let's see. Yeah, we don't have, they talk about the convenience of seeing the energy patterns and then being able to act in response to those energy patterns as opposed to the conditions that they call out of third density, the conditions that sort of drown us in details, that we're thinking about so many different things at once. And then how do we serve purely in a situation where we're thinking about all these different concerns and interests? I think that's the big thing. It's like if we had a single-minded desire to serve at every point in our lives, I think all of us would recognize that our lives would be completely different than they are now.
Agreed.
So we are trying to balance between being of single-minded service and also maintaining a life that can have, so it's like there's services that you do in the moment that take the time of the interaction. There are services you do over a lifetime, such as being a good wife or husband, being a good, employee or a good friend. Like, so to me, it's a lot about what unifies all those different examples of service. Take the time scale out of it and look at what's the nature of the energy that's flowing? What's the nature? How does that love feel? What makes it feel like it's reflecting the inherent unity of everything? And what makes it feel like it's a way to protect ourselves? Because I do think, and I think we've had this conversation on this podcast before, Nithin, because this isn't the first time homelessness has come up. But I know that I have given homeless people money to get them away from me before.
Sorry, get them away from where?
So to be rid of them.
Oh, okay.
And I recognize that that's not a loving way of interacting with them. I don't think I really do that anymore. But it is interesting that something that can ostensibly be service can actually be a way to introduce separation. I mean, to introduce boundaries, right? If you want to use the healthy version of separation as opposed to the unhealthy version.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be separation. Maybe just like a more distorted form of some sort of service, and maybe not true like service to others if you're doing it just to kind of get rid of someone, right? Yeah, I think we all do that from time to time, and there's a part where Quo talks about it's further down, but basically the idea of in the moment forcing yourself to do something out of what is it will. Oh yeah, so this is later on. It says love cannot be, so specifically Quo is answering, in my opinion, talking about in the moment when in the question of the homelessness or whatever else appears, love cannot be cultivated by will or logic. And for me, that's very true in the moment, right? If you don't feel loving in the moment, you can use willpower or logic to emulate. And Quo actually says, you're not moving love, but trying to emulate love. You can absolutely emulate love through will or logic in the moment. But I just want to clarify that I think in the daily practice, where you revisit how whatever happened during the day and you're like, was I really loving or was I not? You can use logic and willpower to figure out what the distortion was that prevented you from naturally feeling the love. But that's very, very difficult to do in the moment, right? And it's less about using will and logic to force yourself to be loving as opposed to using the will and logic afterwards to figure out the distortions and heal and naturally become, I think we've talked about this in the past, organically becoming more loving, right? So that love naturally flows, as opposed to forcing yourself to emulate something that appears loving without actually truly feeling it on the inside.
Yeah, behavior as opposed to a free flowing of love. Yeah. I that's what I think is so difficult about this, is how do you aspire to do something but you can't think about it. You just got to be it, right? Like, well, how do you get there? I think that's a very interesting paradox for people who want to serve.
Yeah, there is a certain momentum behind it, because it's almost like once you know, we've all experienced this once we're on the path. You'll notice you'll be in the zone, a loving zone. You'll just where you naturally feel loving, and and if you study when that occurs and study, use the word study, but just observe when that occurs and when that doesn't occur, you can notice often it's a distortion. It's a worry about work. It's a worry about, um, you know, some sort of friendship, some sort of thing that you're worrying about, you're afraid of, you're insecure about, you have a strong expectation about, that often prevents you from being in that loving zone, that blocks that flow of energy. And it's often deprogramming, and it's very difficult, right? Because society is based on so many of these expectations, on these fears, on these insecurities. And frankly, I think a lot of the what we're taught about being a productive citizen is based on fear, insecurity,
Absolutely.
and expectation that is really designed to maximize productivity as opposed to maximizing, uh, expressing love in the moment, unconditional love. So it's hard to untangle, but it is, I think, a useful and important endeavor to kind of dig down to the roots of what is love and how can I feel it more naturally.
Yeah. The thing that gets me is that last part of what we just read. You cannot know if that which is requested is that which is honestly desired. And that's absolutely true. And that applies to everybody that we seek to serve. Everybody, almost everybody has requests that they would make of us. But from what level is that request coming? And therefore, if it's not coming from the deepest spiritual part of themselves, and therefore is some sort of false self that is doing the requesting, I don't know of any other way to think about what they're saying. Then the question is, how would you know that?
Yeah, I mean that's very difficult, right? Um, and you have obvious examples where it's they're asking for money for food, and they're not going to use it for food, and they might not even realize it at the time when they're asking, right? When you have an addiction, it's not rational, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to use this money to get something that's important, but you end up spending it on drugs and alcohol. But you know what? The reverse is also true. I've seen interactions, because so when I go through, basically, I stop at a gas station with a lot of homeless. And so I see interactions, once again, taking the specific example, but I see interactions between homeless and other people. And what's really interesting is some people will really, really, so some homeless people, obviously, a lot of homeless will ask for money, but some people will give them money in a so disrespectful,
Yeah.
just rude way.
Right.
And you almost, I've seen this multiple times where the guy will accept the money, but he's looking at the dollar and he's like, I feel like I didn't want this experience because, the person said, oh, he just gave him like a disgusted look when they're giving him the money. Just some sort of experience where, I looked at the exchange and I'm like, man, it's almost like they wanted love more than they wanted the money, and they didn't get that love. They got disgust while they're getting the money, and
Yeah.
they're looking at the dollar bill like something like, I didn't really want this. This doesn't, like, it feels off for them. And it's an interesting kind of dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally understand that.
To be treated as a human being, right? Which is, I think, in a certain sense, just wanting to be loved.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Kuo says you are working by faith alone to know yourself and to give of yourself in a way that will be of true service to another. So that's the problem statement, right? It's like we recognize that if we get to this point where we are meeting people at their honest desire, that will have to be, by definition, an act of faith that won't employ our logical ability to think that we did something necessarily for them, or that we behaved in the way that we want to as service to others. Like, what we want is that feedback mechanism that comes from most expressions of love that we're used to, right? Most of the time when you give love, you see that reflected to you. And when you don't see that, you think that something went wrong, right?
Yeah,
When you open up and you're vulnerable to somebody and you try to treat them as you would treat yourself, and that isn't reflected, you think you did something wrong. I mean, one of the biggest things I've taken from Confederation philosophy is that that's not always the case. Sometimes you didn't do anything wrong. That's just the way that the reality is sometimes.
Agree 100%.
Yeah.
There's a raw quote on this that basically, um, the adept, and it talks about, in order to be on the path of adepthood, you have to minimally balance your rays and stuff like that. So it's the term adept is used, I think, past a certain level of progress along the path.
Yeah.
But it talks about the adept works more and more with the energies and things unseen. And really, I think, at least in my journey, faith and working with things where the result of the love is not observable, or, as you just said, the result seems almost to have backfired.
Yeah.
It really, it's a hard lesson to understand logically, but I think it's because certain aspects of faith are not logical. And by the way, we should totally have a podcast on the concept of faith, because it just keeps coming up.
Yep. Yep.
But
that was the plan.
yeah, it's absolutely true that at a certain point, the service to others path, there's things that are going to happen, and there's going to be catalyst where you can't necessarily always get feedback on what happened,
Yeah.
It's frustrating, and at least for me, it can be very frustrating, because I'm like, why? Like, was that the right thing? Like, it's hard.
Well, I think it is a clue. It is a clue that they say you're working by faith alone to know yourself. First thing they say is to know yourself, right? So you have to know the agent that is doing the giving. The giving that you're doing is of yourself that you know. It's that self that you know that you are giving. And whether it's money, whether it's words, whether it's a look, whether it's something tangible or intangible, that I feel is kind of like a sidecar to that self that you are giving, right? And you can't know what will be of true service to another. So it's almost like you have to channel it, honestly. I think at the end of the day, when we talk about acting from faith alone to bring intangible spiritual concepts into manifestation in a moment in time, at a position in space, we are talking about writ large channeling.
Absolutely. So I have a maybe I don't even know if to call it a theory, more like a speculation on this. That I think a lot of the stuff that we do, it affects reality, but I think that maybe reality, there's like parallel realities going on, and that sometimes when you offer a door out of service to others to someone else, and they don't walk through that door, and you're thinking, did I make the right decision? And maybe it even looks like they backfired. They got angry that you offered the door, right? Sometimes I wonder if still that didn't have an effect at some level. Obviously, you could say maybe for that person, when offered that experience to change or whatever, that door again by someone else, they'll walk through it. But I think there's something about about maybe in some alternate dimension they did walk through that door.
Yeah. I think the thing, so we can't know their situation 100%, what service to them, what they actually need, anything like that. But what we can do, and what I think the crux of the service is it's the offering. It is the giving freely and without any condition. It's not, I'm going to give you this $1, but you have to go buy food with it, right? Like that is a means of control.
Right.
We give it freely, and more, we give of ourselves freely with no expectation of what they're going to do with that self. And the reason that we can do that is because we know who we are. And we're standing on a firm foundation of creatorship, meeting another creator in the creation. And we are recapitulating this truth to them.
Yes. And for me, sometimes it's just knowing yourself, in that sometimes we have expectations that when we're doing something so obviously, offering love so obviously and genuinely, sometimes there'll still be a distortion of expectation that even if they don't accept it or whatever, we might be okay with them not accepting it. But we still have this expectation that they won't get angry at us, that they'll clearly see we're trying to help them, and it shouldn't backfire, and they shouldn't blame us when we're trying to be helpful. But sometimes these offerings, they evoke anger, and you're the target of the anger. And I have been frustrated when I'm like, dude, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to help you. Why are you yelling at me over this shit, right? Like, but really, that's also a distortion within us, that we expect that even if they reject it, they'll reject it in a certain way,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it's absolutely true that it's a big part of it is the self as well.
Yeah. And I think they'll continue to unravel this thread as we go. Let's jump back into the session. Kuo says, the discrepancy betwixt what you desire to offer and what is possible to offer of that which the other actually needs or desires is variable. Perhaps what you see is what you get. Perhaps the request is genuine, heartfelt, and transparent. However, it is just as likely that a request for service comes from an entity who does not know himself or accept himself, and who is not aware of that which he actually desires in a spiritual sense. The waters, therefore, are muddied. The goal is almost impossible to see. And like the old philosophical conundrum, an arrow of intent goes half the way to its target, and half the remaining distance, then half the remaining distance, and so forth, approaching the target but perhaps never hitting it. There is no satisfying concussion of contact as the arrow hits the mark. And so no matter how diligently you set your intention to be of service, there is always that feeling of having somehow missed the mark. I think that's just what we were talking about. That feedback of love that we're looking for, and how we have to, that's where the faith comes in, is that we have to be the ones that know that the love's there. Whether or not it presents to us in this clear and self-reinforcing way.
You know, as you're saying that, I thought about the concept that, or had the idea for the first time probably, that maybe faith and patience are really, really interrelated.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if the Confederation talks about how in fourth density people, or mind, body, spirit complexes live, I think, for millions of years, right? And they talk, you know, that third density experience, you know, there's, at least on Earth, it's basically the major cycles of 75,000 years. And these time spans are very long, right? So it's almost like maybe we're just being really, really impatient children when we made an offering of love. And then right then and there, they're not accepting it. It's like, whoa, what's going on, you know?
I actually think I totally agree with you, but it's even deeper than that. That consciousness itself is demarcated by the time scale at which it works. If you are an entity that lives for billions of years, what the moment that you live in means is completely different than a single-celled organism that lives for 2 days. Right. So you can see consciousness expanding in time scale through the upward spiraling light as it traverses higher and higher. Like, what we are attempting to do in incarnation is bring, in some senses, that patience of the long time scale to a situation where things happen like that, right?
Exactly.
And
it's hard.
And right. And because it's hard, it exercises our faith. And that is what we take with us. Not whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing in a given situation. Nobody's going to remember that for very long.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of transferring between channels because this is an intensive session. So a new person jumps in. I have a suspicion of who it is, but I'm not going to say. Here we go. I am Kuo, and I'm with this instrument. We have been speaking to that condition in the third density experience, which is conditioned by the effect of the veiling. We have pointed out that the veiling is certainly a factor in the experience of desire on the part of the one who requests the service. We would now suggest that the veil is also a factor on the part of one who seeks to provide a service. We speak here to a group in which we feel confident that all members seek service to others. And yet it is true that as one seeks refinement upon the path of service to others, one is again and again thrown back upon the self. Again and again, one is put in a situation in which one seeks to achieve a certain fastidiousness in one's intent, so that one's service may be more earnestly, clearly, and effectively offered. One seeks, in short, to become better in service to others. Now, this condition of being better is a quality to which one aspires, which one would like to apply to the self. I seek, one says to oneself, to become a better servant. I seek to become better. It would seem in the trajectory of that effort of seeking that the goal is oneself. One wishes to make of oneself what one would wish to be. This seeming paradox, that is to say, that one proposes to serve others, and in that proposal to make of oneself the exquisitely effective servant of others, creates a host of circumstances in which the most terrible confusions are possible. Anything we want to jump in with right here? I kind of want to see where he goes.
I think they talk about it more later, about what is the concept being discussed. So I'm willing to wait.
Yeah, let's continue. It is all too easy to lose one's way when a gesture which one feels is intended to exhibit the uttermost generosity is thrown back in one's face. And in the sting of the rejection, one finds oneself utterly thrown back upon oneself, questioning both the value of the recipient and the nature and worth of one's own intent. One is lost in the middle of a conundrum. One is without a sense of anchorage, even so much as to be able to frame the proper point of attack from which the problem could be analyzed and brought to clarity. So effective is the veil that not only are the desires and intentions of others shrouded in an impenetrable mystery, but so, for the most part, are those of the self. Even one's clearest desires to be of service can come packaged in with those effective qualities, which go in a quite different direction, which expresses one's own need, one's own structure of aspiration, and one's own sense of one's frailties or failings. Little does it occur to one when offering a generous gesture that one is asking of the proposed recipient the grace of receiving this gesture in such a way that the true nature of the intent behind the gesture might come to light. Little is one aware that one is so utterly vulnerable in a situation which on the face of it seems so one-sidedly an attempt to be of service to another. Okay, I think we have a coherent and complete point there, and it is quite impressive. Don't you agree?
Totally.
It shows you when we are giving to people we think that are vulnerable, who say that they need us, we need them. We need them. And that's part of what hurts. That's part of why we try to do better, because we need to do better. It's us, not them. This is the veil, folks. This is the illusion that we find ourselves in. We cannot know. You're not going to big brain this. It's not to be figured out like a puzzle. It's to be loved like your brother or sister. There's a lot of words to say that, though.
So, two things come up with respect to that. Once again, two examples of what we just read is talking about. So, these interactions, right, they reveal a lot about the self and what the self needs or what's behind the veil, right? So just two recent examples, because literally, man, I end up on a weekly basis probably buying or getting or giving money to homeless, and two recent experiences come up that revealed stuff about the self. So one was that a homeless gentleman was like, "Hey, I'm hungry. Can you get me some food? Or do you have money for food?" And I'm like, "No, man, I'm not. But hey, here's the gas station right here. I can buy you something." And he's like, "Okay, cool. Can you get me like?" And he listed off like 5 different things. First of all, he listed off like $25 worth of stuff. What? I was like, okay, whatever. I offered, and I've given people like $20 before, so it was within that realm. But it was a little. I was like, "Are you really gonna eat all that right now?" But then on top of it, he listed off like mostly candy and junk food, and I'm like, really, you're hungry and you're just getting a bunch of but then I immediately noticed, and once again, I didn't try to force myself to be loving, and I examined it later on, but I like had an expectation that he'd be asking for stuff other than like Snickers and like, candy bars and stuff. But that's what he wanted. I ended up getting it for him anyway, but later that day I had to balance my reaction because I was like annoyed and like, like what the hell's going on? Like, why are you getting all this junk food and candy if you're really hungry, right?
It feels like you're being scammed.
Yeah, it was just like something felt off, but it was really, and there might have been multiple things being off, right? His
Yeah.
desire, but I noticed within me once again that expectation. But I think more on point specifically to what you just described in this quote is sometimes I have money on me, but I guess I don't have a lot of money. And I've had a homeless person be disgusted with me when I don't
Yeah.
give them enough. And I'm like, hey man, that's all. Like sometimes I only have $1, and usually I think most of the time they're happy with it. But I've had homeless be like, you can't buy anything with $1, and they like express disgust at me after taking the money, and it bothered me, like because I wanted to feel a little bit more love from them, right?
Yeah.
They were like angry at me, and maybe it was because I was, I think the one time that happened, it was back when I was driving a BMW, and it was a person who's asking on the side of the street, and so maybe that was the judgment going on. I don't know, but now I drive a Prius for the record. But yeah, like it felt like I was seeking love from the person, and I wasn't getting it.
Yeah. And I think the thing maybe to reflect on is that's completely and totally normal and acceptable for you to want to be loved. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You have a you have a right to be loved, regardless of whether you did anything in that situation.
Yeah.
Coming to a place where we can hone our faith, stand on our own 2 feet, and offer love, regardless of the situation, regardless of our needs, is a very tough and highly disciplined way to serve, and it's not easy. I think the best thing to do is to recognize when you feel hurt that you're hurt, and to accept that. To not
Yes.
say that, hey, they were supposed to do this. Yeah, maybe they were, but life and the lessons that it delivers to us are not what should be. It's what actually occurs. You know what I mean? And we have to look at life square in the face and take it as it comes. And our perception plays a big role in it, in how we perceive it and how we experience it. But at the end of the day, we do need to be accepted and loved and cherished by people. And it's not wrong to feel a little bit exploited in a situation like that. But it also gives us an opportunity to reflect and to look at the nature of what we were trying to do.
Yes.
What is it about that interaction that disappointed us?
Exactly.
Especially when you're talking about somebody who is so vulnerable and in such peril that I can't really imagine it. I have to believe that I have the capacity to cut a lot of slack. And the homeless thing, again, this is just a very intense example of what we deal with
Right.
in all aspects of our life. When our wife doesn't give us the
Be careful.
the feedback. Yeah, like no, I mean we all do it. Yeah. I don't even know she listens anymore.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But you know, this is why I see the question asked in the session to be so penetrating and poignant, is because service, like Kuo says, service is something we do. We want to do the best. How do we do the best in a way that we can't ever know if we're doing it the best we can?
It's a hard question.
Yeah, and I think the issue is we have to look within for the feedback mechanism. The kind of service to others adept who goes out there and serves others with no judgment and no condition is not looking outside of himself to see what to do.
Right.
He's looking within himself to see what to do.
That's exactly true.
That's why I say that it approaches a kind of channeling.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
And of course, vocal channeling, like the channeling we're just reading here, is just one very articulated example of that. But remember that this is what you are aspiring to. You are aspiring not to figure out how to serve in these situations. You're aspiring how to get out of your own way and serve.
Yes.
All right, so let's continue. There is little to do in situations in which confusions of this nature, or many others which we could name, arise, but to recharge the batteries, so to speak, and to make an attempt anew, reinvesting the intention with another intention as pure as one can make it, as clear as one can make it, even with the realization that every new attempt will bring with it new possible sources of obscurity, new possible sources of difficulty. My brothers and sisters in third density, it is not for you to know. It is for you to love without knowing. It is not for you to succeed. It is for you to attempt and attempt again, fully realizing there is no available measure of success that can be infallibly applied. What there is for you is the open-hearted appeal to those around you to accept in the spirit in which it is intended your most earnest effort to be alike a source of inspiration and a mirror to others. Now, right here, I think we get even deeper. I mean, I think that's a beautiful passage, that last one. But remember, your effort is not simply a one-way vector from your resources to the other. It is also to be a mirror of what they are sending to you. We are looking for that feedback because we want to see in that other, the mirror that in that mirror of the other, the image we want to see of ourselves.
Yes.
We have to accept what that person is showing us. But we are also giving that person a reflection of themselves. The true altruism, the true service to others is when you can give them the best reflection of themselves in what you do. And when we can take the image that we don't like and love it anyway.
Yes. And, I don't know if there's Confederation channelings that come out and say this, but it seems that even if you're very far along this path, you're still going to have situations and mirrors which are not pleasant. I think at one point in the Raw channeling, there's some sort of contact by a negative entity or something, and they ask, why is this happening? And Raw's like, are you not all things?
Right. So
I think to a certain extent, there's always going to be those mirrors where you don't like looking at it, And there's also a quote, Ross talks about that regardless of the situation, a perfectly, quote, balanced entity would react with love to every situation. And when I read that, I was almost thinking that it almost seems to imply that you're going to have still a variety of crazy situations potentially, even as a perfectly balanced entity, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's almost like, you're not always going to have, while you are, so this issue of feedback, right? Well, first of all, you're not always going to get it. But second of all, I think even when you get some sort of feedback, it's not always going to be something pleasant, right?
Yeah.
You're always going to get that sometimes distorted, broken mirror experience.
Right. We think that when something unpleasant happens to us, it means that there's something wrong.
Exactly. And that's not true.
It's not true. And like a great example of this that just occurred to me is like those of us who like to watch movies in which sometimes we see the deprivations of humanity. We see very disturbing mirror images of ourselves. And yet because we're in this, because there's this fourth wall between us and the imagined situation, it's easy to see that mirror. We don't take it on ourselves quite the same way as we do when we're in the moment looking at it with our own eyes. And yet we recognize that there's something value about looking in that disturbing mirror.
Absolutely. And I think another great example, in addition to the movie example, are dreams and nightmares, right? And sometimes in the dream and nightmare, depending on how lucid you are, you're like, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
But then when you get out of it, you're like, oh, that was a very interesting, and depending on your dream practice, you might find a great deal of use and information from a dream. But bottom line is you don't take it, there's that, you recognize the experience for what it is.
Yeah. There's one other thing I'd like to say about the little passage we read that came from the beginning when they said, there's not really anything else to do but recharge your batteries and try again. I want to place emphasis on the recharging the batteries part. There is no shame, there is no failure, there is no problem with taking a break from the illusion insofar as you can, and going back to a place where you can feel rest and secure. None of us are in third density because we have it all figured out. We're all here because we're trying to figure it out. We are trying to take those sometimes horrifying images in the mirror and love them just as much as we love those beautiful images that we see. And that is taxing. It wouldn't, if it wasn't taxing, we wouldn't need to be here. We would be in some other part of the creation. So take it easy on yourself. Serve as best you can. Put your all into it. And then if it doesn't work out, lean on your friends. Lean on your family. Open yourself. You know, one of the things that has been opening to me over the last few years is the magic in taking a negative situation that is disturbing or troublesome or disheartening and using it instead of what I would normally do, which would be to retreat into myself and feel sorry for myself and make up narratives about how I'm all right and everybody else is all wrong. I use this as an opportunity to open up to others, share with them, and ask for their comfort. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's just as important to be able to receive love as it is to give love. This is something that Carla really dealt with a lot. And it's funny because I was just talking to a working group member earlier today about this. But if you imagine what the social memory complex actually is that we are going to be in, to the extent that you can imagine it, we are going to be completely exposed to each other. There will be no secrets. There will be no inner self that we hide from everybody else. We will be completely open to them. And the power that comes from that is that we don't have to defend and hide ourselves anymore. We don't have to exert all its energy to maintain a self that they'll quote unquote like. No, we can just be ourselves, knowing that everybody else is they've done just as much effed up stuff as we have. They were just hiding it from us, just like we're hiding our stuff from them. Once we can let those boundaries down, it becomes a moment where people can connect and see their true humanity. And they can see the love that's even in those dark moments because there's not all this effort exerted in hiding it. This is what we're building to. This is every time that you go easy on yourself and you go easy on your fellow man, you are building towards this future, this great future that we are all heading towards, where we will finally let the barriers drop and we will all be able to see how beautiful and horrible we all are and that we're all one.
I couldn't have said it better. So you raised, two points. One, this idea of recharging, how essential it is, and to really not judge ourselves for it.
Yeah.
And then two, the second idea is that specifically when it comes to recharging and processing catalysts, how useful it is to have a community of people you can interact with at that level. So let me first start with that latter point. I think part of the reason why, Jeremy, I love talking to you and I love being a part of the one working group is we have these relationships where we can process these things at this level. Because I'm single. I don't have a wife or a loved one other than my parents, but I can interact and discuss what's bothering me in a way that helps me recharge with my parents or my family. And frankly, not many friends in real life. I don't really have. I have really solid friends, best friends. One on all the way on the East Coast, who I could talk this stuff about, but it's hard to somehow get them on the phone. So bottom line is, I don't have many people in real life that I can really interact with at a level that really helps me fully recharge. Right? You can always recharge a little bit with people who might not understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's really, really useful to have people you can just really share your experiences with. So I totally, I'm 100% behind that idea that it's really important to build that community. Now, with respect to just recharging in general, and sometimes I just want to make some uh, comments about this because I feel one, I think people too often judge themselves for just wanting to recharge, for needing to recharge. And that place of judgment can come from many different areas. Places that I've seen it come from is one, it's an over focus on doing stuff physically for others without realizing that it's not just what you physically do for others. It's the energy of your interaction. Are you stressed out?
Mm-hmm.
Are you rushing them? Do you feel like you have to go to the next case or help the next client when you're interacting with that person in that moment? Because if you're doing that, you're probably not bringing as much as love and light through in that interaction as you could be. And usually it's because you're over focusing on kind of just pushing out the numbers, and in the same place at the same time usually deny um, recharging yourself so that love will flow through you. And often the person you're helping, even if you objectively help them on whatever issue they have physically, you'll notice that in their satisfaction, they sometimes won't feel as satisfied as when you maybe helped fewer people, but you took more time and effort to be more loving. And that comes not just from being slower, but from also recharging your own batteries. And I think sometimes we also judge ourselves for recharging our own batteries, or at least I have, for another reason, in that recharging a person's batteries can look very similar on the outside to the third party as a distraction and avoidance of your issues. But it's almost like, take whatever, it's almost like take whatever healthy activity, right? And you can make it into something that's unhealthy, right? So you can go to the gym. In general, it's very healthy. But if you come a gym rat who's using that specifically to avoid problems at home or whatever, you're using it as avoidance, right? Um, take the occasional, I don't know, watching TV or playing video games, right? If you're using that to recharge, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And really, we should. I don't even like the language of wrong and right, but I'm using it.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that all the time because you don't want to, we've all done this. I've done this. But if you're
Heck
doing that all
yeah.
the time to like not address something that's bothering you or an issue, it becomes distraction. So I think for me, I used to associate the activity with something as bad or good, and judge myself. Oh, I can't, and I'd eliminate all my recharging activities as, oh, this is just distraction. And then I realized, it's not necessarily distraction to just want an evening to yourself where you might just spend time Netflixing, right? It's not, it's less about the activity and more about how you're going about it. Are you going about your day, whatever activity you're doing, and using it not to avoid but to recharge, right? Like where you're letting yourself feel bad for whatever experience that happened, and you're processing it in the background, or you're just like, I'm just not even going to think about it at all, right? So I think recharging is very important, and it's very important to not judge yourself for it. And it's very useful to have a community where you can draw upon and call upon to share in whatever you're going through.
Yeah, I think what a community offers is the ability to distract oneself in a way that, well, first of all, you can distract yourself with the kind of social interaction that actually is an exchange of energy
Right.
instead of watching TV or getting high or getting drunk in a way that doesn't really have that social impact. And it just kind of, I often find that I just reinforce my own narratives and I build up like mental constructs that explain my own feelings to me rather than just feeling the feelings as they are. And there doesn't need to be a why.
Very
So
agreed.
when you talk to others, you get mirroring, you get other perspectives, and you can sometimes even see a different side of something that helps you forgive it or make it easier on yourself. Um, but I just think that whether it's distraction or not, whether it's, I mean, even if you are just like getting drunk to deal with, to cope, like it's important to go easy on yourself and to understand that what you're trying to do is hard. Living a human life is hard. And trying to do it to your highest ideals is really hard, really hard. A lot of people live according to their high ideals in a way that can be easily seen by others. And that's very reassuring, but it doesn't partake a lot of reflecting on oneself and going within
Right.
and trying to figure out, okay, I made this attempt at service. What about it was pure? What about it wasn't pure? That's not a judgment. That is a kind of reflection that's saying, okay, how am I doing here? What did I do that maybe did detune this? Knowing that you're always going to detune it somehow. That's why I think they talk so much about knowing the self, because it is in the knowing of these these little impurities in our expressions of love, that we actually can work on them.
Exactly. And as you're discussing this, as you're talking about this, I thought of an analogy in my head, workout analogy, right? So for those of us who lift, right, and are trying to put on muscle mass, this concept of progressive overload, right? So you're making great progress, but you always want it to be hard. And I was thinking, man, that's almost like how it is on this path. Like you might be making great progress, but it is always going to be hard. And it doesn't mean that you're not making progress. It doesn't mean, oh, I haven't. Don't be disheartened when even what we're talking about right now, right? And all of that we're talking about is ideal stuff, and I try to, and I feel like I do put a lot of it into practice, but I'm not always able to do what we've talked about here. Like we fail and we forgive ourselves, and we think about, okay, well maybe how can I move the needle so I feel a little bit less often in that way. But it's okay to mess up. It's okay to distract yourself. It's all these things are acceptable. And once again, just because we accept something doesn't mean that we're not gonna at some point revisit, hey, maybe can we move the needle and maybe organically do better next time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And just as a final thing, I'd say this reflection will sometimes partake of analysis, of intellectual analysis, but it doesn't always have to. I would I would encourage the listener to sit with feelings that are difficult, to not try to explain them, to not try to like make up a story about them or start thinking about how this other person did X, Y, and Z, but just sit with the pure feel, as pure
Yes.
of a feeling as you can, and just get used to having this equipment that has these things called feelings. You know what I mean? Like then
Absolutely.
they won't bother you so much. It will always bother you to feel guilt or disdain or disrespect or anything like that. That's fine. But like it's when these things come out of nowhere and hit us because we aren't expecting them. Remember, in a past session we talked about the open heart is ready for anything. The open
Yes.
heart is ready for anything. That is the level at which we are trying to become vulnerable and open to our other selves. Is at the level where even if they pull a gun on us, ideally, I'm speaking in ideal terms. I saw the look on your face. I'm just saying that like it's kind of like what would Jesus do, right? Like the right and like what Ross says is, if a tiger's attacking you, what's the right, response? The right response is love. The problem is that how does that love actually manifest in the moment? How does it actually translate into my arms or legs moving? That
Yeah.
is something that we can spend several lifetimes trying to figure out. And it's tough. It's not easy. So go easy on yourself. And I think that the big part of this that I think the takeaway is that one should take away is that service shows us something about ourselves. It is not a one-way vector. It bounces back to us. And the feedback that we get may not be pleasant, but there's something to be done with it. There's some
Yes.
grounding to be done with it. So you always have something to work with. You always have good medicine, good food to work with through experience. Let's go ahead and continue. So they transfer to another channel again. We are those of Kuo. The attempt that a servant of the light makes to be of service allows that servant to discover things about him or herself. It allows that being to come across those dirty fingerprints on the window that cast shadows when the sun tries to pass through them. Each of those dirty fingerprints has to be attended to. And it is only by placing yourself in the light and desiring to have the light come through you that those flecks of dirt and fingerprints and grime can be discerned. It is a gift to the self when one wishes to be of service, thus fulfilling the paradox spoken of earlier. Let us speak about the fingerprint on the window that is called fear. In effect, each fingerprint could be labeled fear, because fear is the opposite of love. When this instrument, in the example spoken of in the question posed in this group, chose to give the possession of her ring to whichever homeless person or beggar in her city asked of her for the value of money, she discovered that place of fear within her, that fear of being approached, of looking into the eyes of another self, and being asked for something that she could not give or did not feel that she had the right to give. When she carried that ring with her, the intention of giving it away, the fear lifted. When she carried that ring with her with the intention of giving it away, the fear lifted. And in that lifting of the fear, a connection of love, which was made because she could look in the eye of everyone that passed her, knowing that she could be of service when service was asked of her. I like the idea of the window with the light shining through it, and that the service allows us to discover these places where the light is being blocked or occluded from shining through. That very much tracks with the idea that what we are doing is attempting to bring something spiritual, ineffable, ideal, infinite into manifestation directly through our actions, through our service, through our quality of being.
I never thought of it in those terms, but yeah, I mean, it really, um, in a lot of ways, the path of service to others is just allowing more and more of the Creator's love to flow through you, and uh, it's part of that process is going to be there's going to be things that are blocking that flow, and it's going to be mirrored in physical reality by these catalytic experiences.
Yeah. I also like that this channel, this instrument, discovered that once she got down to the crux of what it was that she was actually afraid of, she was able to come up with a strategy, an approach that allowed her to be free. I think that is actually a pretty good use of analysis. But you're not using the analysis to discover what that core fear is or what that core distortion is. You're feeling into that. Yes. Once you discover what that is, it's like, okay, well, how can I work with the fact that I have this distortion to be free, to be radiant, and to give without care?
And I don't think that can be underemphasized enough that at least it sounds like for both of us, it's so important to embrace the feeling fully without judgment, without rationalization, and only the process of using logic comes after you're able to fully feel it. Because if you try to do it in the reverse, and I've tried, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
It does not work, and it feels bad too.
Yes,
it feels bad. You're not gonna trick your Lord God, right? Like you're not gonna mock him. Let's see. All right, let's go ahead and continue. When the fear is no longer there between two selves, there does the light flow between creator and creator. There is no longer a holding that traps energy. The energy flows more freely through the chakras, specifically orange and yellow, those chakras that deal with society and the interactions with another self. In giving of things of which the self has possession, one gives of the self and allows those blockages to be released, because there is no longer a blockage between creator and creator. Although the act of generosity was not performed by giving this ring, the desire to give and be of service was what helped this seeker find a blockage and release it, which is the only purpose that was necessary, the act of giving being much less relevant than the gift of love that was created and the discovery of a blockage to that love. This frames exactly what we were saying. It is in that service, even service that goes awry, it teaches us, and it shows us something that otherwise we would not see. And in being able to see it, we are given a choice. We are given a door that we can walk through, and we can figure out how to show love by balancing that distortion, or even how to accommodate that distortion so that we can be free. I say that phrase, being free, a lot, because I think that's a lot of how love feels. Love feels like a freedom. It's a freedom to serve.
Yes.
It is a freedom that you are not protecting yourself, defending yourself. You're not looking out so that you don't get like bamboozled or anything like that. You are walking freely in the Lord's creation.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about some experiences I had when you were discussing this paragraph, and also when the quote talks about the energy flows more freely through the chakras, specifically orange and yellow, these chakras
Right.
that deal with society and the interactions with another self. So what was really interesting about a couple experiences I had, so I don't know when I started doing this. I guess at some point, maybe 10 years ago, I just stopped carrying cash on me. So I always enjoy giving and helping out the homeless. Um, so it was around that time when, if I didn't have any money, I'd be like, hey, I can buy you something. And sometimes they just tell me what they want, but sometimes like, okay, I'll come into the store, I'll come into the subway, and I'll order something. And I remember the first few times I did it, and this didn't happen until after the offering was given, and specifically the homeless gentleman came into the subway and was in line with me. Like everyone was like staring at me, and the better way to say it is it felt like everyone was staring at me. Probably only got a few stares. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was almost like the societal expectation that this isn't something that's done. Or I don't know what was going on, but there was some energy that I felt within myself. Like it just felt, the best way to describe it was, it felt weird. It just felt weird. I'm like, where is this coming from? I didn't have a problem offering it and walking him into the subway, but as soon as there's other people in here watching me, it like feels weird. I don't know why. And I had that and now once I did that more and more, it didn't feel as weird, but it was almost like I was grappling with this yellow ray distortion of the experience, and maybe orange as well, right? So judging myself for doing something weird. I had the same experience when when I gave my belt to a homeless gentleman. That was only like, I think, a year ago, and I'm sure very few people were actually looking at me. It was on the side of the street. There were a lot of cars parked, but at a light, not parked, stopped at a light. But I remember when I was doing it, as soon as like I held out my hand with the belt, like I felt this flush of like, man, this is so weird, And so it was really interesting in that sometimes it's not even stuff that you like. I had no idea I would feel that way, right? So it's just really interesting in that I feel like I sometimes learn how much I've internalized societal norms about what's considered normal and not, and how much that could, even something as basic as that, can block the flow of love a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't forget that this is also a lesson that others are learning because of your example, right? Awkwardness,
Yes.
social awkwardness.
Yes.
We should probably expect, given how cruel our social norms are, that showing love will often feel awkward, and it will often make people feel awkward.
Thank you. I love how you generalized that, and it's absolutely true, man. It's absolutely true.
It's going to look
and I'm
really
still
weird.
not over that. It still bothers me from time to time. It's not that I don't want to do this.
No, you're invested in looking like a reasonable person, just like all of us are.
Yeah, and it's hard, man. It's hard. It's weird because if there's no one around, not a problem. No one around except who I'm helping out, there's no hesitation.
Yeah.
But when there's others, I'm like, ugh. And then I'm like, this is,
Who isn't trying to look like a reasonable person who has it together?
Yeah. And honestly, maybe as wanderers, we feel this a little bit more strongly because we're already, if at least this has been true in my experience, and Raw talks about this and Quote talks about this, we already feel a little bit alienated, right?
Oh, yeah.
From everyone else. We always feel like we're so different.
Absolutely.
So we want to, I think there's a natural desire to feel more accepted within us, and maybe it manifests in that way. Instead of realizing that ultimately, while acceptance by society is nice, it's not required to feel that love. But
Nope.
you don't just get there by repeating what I just said. You have to figure out organically how is it that I get to a place. What are the situations where I notice I don't? First of all, feel the emotion, and then maybe you at some point revisit it with logic, being like, what are the situations where I naturally notice I don't care about societal norms in some aspect, and then how can I get there organically in these other situations where I do really care about societal norms, right?
Yeah, and it's all about using this opportunity to investigate different blockages of love, different smudges on the window pane. We all have them, and they are what they are. All right, so to continue. It has been said by this instrument's teacher and those of the Confederation to look for love in all situations. In working with the self in these subtle arts, it is just as helpful to look for the fear. Why are you afraid? Why is the love seemingly absent? What are the remedies for the self for making this fear or blocking this love? I mean, this just puts a fine point on what we were just saying.
Exactly.
And I think it's an interesting directive to expand just looking for love. I agree that we should be looking for the love in this situation. That is the core paradox of the Confederation's philosophy when put into practice, I think. But I think looking for the fear is also very good because it's almost certainly there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost certainly there for most of us. And it's instructive. It can teach us a lot about what we don't want to look at.
Very instructive. And this concept has come up before, but so often I feel like in certain types of New Age philosophy, the belief is just don't think any negative thoughts. And I actually have the opposite perspective, is let yourself feel. When they say negative thoughts, they're not talking about service to self. They're talking about uncomfortable emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in my journey, I found, and I think Confederation philosophy also talks about this, you're not there to avoid all the uncomfortable emotions. You know, they're signposts. You know, they're helpful. The fear is a guide on how to be more loving. And yes, the fear you can get a little bit. You'll get some feedback with more and more work. You'll notice the same situations. You won't react with fear. You'll react with love. But at least my level of understanding is there's always going to be some amount of fear. It'll get less and less there because you're always going to be growing. You're always going to be doing that progressive overload. And it's there to teach us.
I think this is a good time to mention one of my favorite excerpts from Hatan back in 83.
Let's do it.
This is from August 14th, 1983. We give this instrument a vision it does not understand. This instrument sees the hammer descending upon the anvil and the rock breaking. We attempt to say to this instrument that that which is not tempered will break. Go through the fire of experience willingly, my friends, and be tempered a bit at a time, that with experience you may bend and learn and become stronger and serve more and more that great ideal that you so cherish. On the surface, the spiritual path seems poetic and dramatic and will attract many who will become weak-hearted. No, my friends, the spiritual path is for those who are tough and who wish to become tougher. Perfect compassion involves an unbelievable personal discipline. For how in this great illusion can you naturally believe that all others are one with you? I mean, that's why that's on the front page of the Other Selves Working Group, because that's what we're dealing with.
It's a beautiful quote, beautiful concept.
It's not for those of us who want to just look good while we're doing it. It's for those of us who are willing to get dirty, who are willing to take ourselves to the breaking point. So when I talk about, recharging the batteries, going easy on yourself, I'm talking about when you're out of the situation and at the crux of the moment, and you're kind of finding yourself in the wake of all of these storms and waves of catalyst. But we walk willingly into it. We wake up every day and we walk into this storm. And everybody does that. We are just trying to do it in a little bit more disciplined way so that when we walk through it, maybe we can feel the Creator with us and others can see the Creator in themselves when we do it.
Yes. And when Hatan says this is for the strong, it reminds me of, if you look up, I forget the name, but basically Hinduism also has the chakras and the energy rays. And if you look up the concepts for the heart chakra, one of the concepts is strength.
Yeah.
Just strength. And, I think normally, at least my impression of pop culture in the U.S., when they think about the heart, they think about emotional, vulnerable, and maybe they think about the heart as courage when you're talking about fighting and warriors, right? But strength. And really, when you get down to it, it's the strength to truly feel, well, one, the strength and courage to be vulnerable, but once you're vulnerable and whatever the uncomfortable emotion hits you, it's the strength to feel it, to take it, not just avoid that emotion. And that takes a lot of strength to actually feel it. But when you know, and I think I've talked about this before, but when you fully allow an uncomfortable emotion to flow through you, fully allow it, you actually feel the energy moving up through your heart.
Yeah,
Like you
I
feel
agree.
it. It's amazing.
It is amazing. And this is why it's so important to apply these ideas to your own life and to see in your own life some sort of feedback mechanism that you can start to use to put this into context, to put all of this into context. It all sounds wonderful when we're talking about it in these high-minded terms, but putting it into practice is how you're going to know whether or not it's actually true.
Sometimes I feel like a lot of what we talk about, it's stuff that we often need to hear, right?
Oh,
It's so
hell yeah.
often what we need to hear. Yeah,
Hell yeah.
yeah. Just good stuff.
Absolutely.
It's that
Oh,
mirroring effect.
all right. So we're going back to the other session and continuing. Kuo says, society as a whole can be seen as an entity of sorts, and there can be a societal block of love. And a seeker who wishes to serve is pressed against that social blockage. Wow, this is talking exactly about what you were just talking about. In this way, one can see where the catalyst of interacting with a society rather than a person comes into play. There are social norms to service. We as a society see some things to be of a service and some things not to be of a service. Some things your society sees as being a greater service than others. Many of the seekers in this particular group, organization, affiliation do their best to arrange family life around what they consider to be of service, positing that what they are already doing is not of service and that they need to make room in order to be of service. They juggle family lives and free up time so that they may go do service. Consider that in your attempt to be of your highest and best self, regardless of what you are already doing, you are already of service at every moment of your life. Going to your facilities and emptying your bowels is of service because if you did not do so, you would not be a very effective seeker in your life. You need to sustain this body with water and nutrients. You need sleep. You need to have social time, playtime. This is not at the sake of doing service. This too is service. One may consider, instead of seeking to do service, to give gratitude to the service one already does. One may say, thank you, Mother Earth, for giving me this plate of rice that will nourish this instrument, so that I may have the energy and patience to be a loving spouse or mother or father or friend. One might say, thank you for this good night's rest, that I may wake up refreshed in the morning to be at my highest and best self, for that desire alone is a great service. Pretty good.
So the concept of expressing gratitude is one that, for whatever reason, I didn't approach it from this perspective of finding it, of looking for when it organically arose within me and then trying to recreate that. I used to just express gratitude more through just willpower. Oh, I should be more expressing gratitude. But lately, I've been kind of moving to a place where whenever I feel really good, realize basically an expression of gratitude is just a moment away, and just to give for the whatever the good feeling is. Don't take credit or address credit to any. I mean, you can at a certain level, but ultimately, the credit goes to the creator.
Right.
And expressing the gratitude to the creator. So the other day I had a great lunch with other people in the same industry as me, and I think in the past many years ago I might have been like, oh, given all the credit to myself and my friends, but and may, in a certain sense there's still credit there, but the ultimate credit is with the creator. And I remember right after lunch on the drive back, I gave credit to the creator, and I don't know how to put it, but there's a transformation in consciousness that occurs the more and more you naturally express gratitude for your experiences to the creator. And that's all I can really say on that,
I think so this is something that you have actually given me a lot of good advice on, about being grateful for your catalyst. You've talked about how transformative this is, and I've seen it in my life. And I think the reason is that it forces you in a way to identify with your greater self. Obviously,
Yes.
obviously, if I'm just a human body, stumbling through life, I should not be grateful for those things that, put mud in my face or that make me fall down. But from this idea of a greater self who's learning spiritual lessons, all of that is seen as like par for the course. And so I can be grateful for the fact that I'm doing the work, that I'm feeling the things that I need to feel, and that I'm participating in a greater project than simply my own narrow desire to, get drunk or go on vacation or make money or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
This is how flexible and supple the mind is that we can work in these very fine ways with our mental faculties to change who the self is that is doing the choosing for service to others or service to self, to change the terms of the debate within ourselves, to change what the situation is. And this is why I think they speak in terms of the adept, because that's a magical act to do that, to change it so that for the service to others adept, like Ross says, the pitch of light is always held above the head, right? No matter how bad the situation is, the pitch of light is above the head. You are the master who makes the grass green. You decide what's acceptable and not, what's bad and good. And the more that you decide to make your waking consciousness a component of a larger project than you can directly entertain in your in your waking consciousness, the more that everything is going to fit together, and you're going to ground these lessons and yield them up to the Creator in ways that really assist you and the entire creation.
I love it, Jeremy. I feel like in these podcasts, I feel like there's like low level channeling going on in just how we describe these concepts. So I couldn't have said it better.
It does make me think we should tune before we start recording.
I actually thought that. I thought that today.
I used to do that. I
Yeah,
used to
yeah.
do that with Ryan. We used to do a little meditation beforehand. Maybe we should start doing that.
No, yeah. I think that's good.
And just one more thing, just to reiterate, like in a society that is sick, healthiness will look weird, right? Like being
yes.
well adjusted to a broken society is not a sign of health. I think that's what the actual quote is. But like, we are probably going to be working against the grain sometimes. It's not going to be understood by people. And one way of looking at that is, oh, well, I guess they're just going to think that I'm somebody who's crazy, or that I am not being a good adult, that I'm not responsible, that I haven't accepted the way things are in this world.
Right.
Another way to look at it is that you're providing a counterexample to a lifetime of examples that said that this is the way the world is to them.
Yeah.
You don't have to reinforce them just because that's where they ended up. You can set a different example. And the great thing is that when you set examples that go way outside the norm, they actually appear to the person more impressive, more intense than if you just do the same old thing that they expect. It's the unexpected that registers in the brain, and that's the kind of stuff that people are going to remember, is the crazy wacko stuff.
Absolutely. And I've done that personally, but I have to also be honest that I probably take more of a middle path, just because
I do too.
Where in my heart, like I don't really care about a lot of social norms at all. Now, some things will still bother me, like in those examples I talk about, stuff feels weird. But I will often outwardly give lip service to whatever the social norm is, just because I feel like I don't want every interaction to be abrasive. But maybe this is a fear. Maybe a lot of those interactions won't be abrasive, and it's just being more comfortable with being seen as a weirdo. I don't know, but I know that
it's all about where you can actually be of service. And you're
Right.
not going to know that. And our training, Nathan, I would imagine we're both united in this, is that we are taught what to do, how to behave, how to present ourselves in ways that don't make people uncomfortable. I
Right.
think that's generally a good thing to not make people uncomfortable.
Right.
Generally, it's not a bad thing to do that. The issue is what happens when that starts becoming a smudge on your window pane.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you and I can't tell the listener when it's going to be the case. It can only be ascertained by going within and connecting with a deeper part of yourself so that you're not constantly looking to others to tack off of their reactions, right? You have to
Right.
be able to stand on your own 2 feet with your own power. We're all weird. I can
Oh,
guarantee you
yeah.
that.
For sure.
All weird. All right, let's go ahead and continue. The acting out of service, or what your society conceives of as service, we propose to you is much less important. For one works on the self. One always works on the self. And when one works on the self, the inner self, the outer situations take care of themselves. We propose to this group to put less energy into worrying about performing those acts you each consider to be of service, and put those energies of worry into being thankful for the service you each now already perform. Your society holds up as models those people whom you each consider to have been model servants of the light. Mohandas, the one known as Jesus, and the one known as Martin gave tremendously of themselves to the point of giving their own lives. Many peoples of your planet have in the past worn bracelets of some such reminder with the inscription WWJD, asking of themselves, what would Jesus do in this or that situation? Each of these people did not say to themselves, what should I do? What is the thing that is of service? They just did service. How is this possible? How does one know what the right service is? We say to you that this is an unskilled question. Once again, the skill thing, right? The skilled question is to find the love and the service will follow. When the heart is open, to the extent it was open in the 3 individuals mentioned, there are no questions of what is of service. There is merely service. The heart leads the way. The faithful servant follows, and the love appears. The light shines through. When you ask what would be of service, you are removing faith, and instead you are using the intellect to replace your faith. You are not moving love, but trying to emulate love. One can try to cultivate love, but we would suggest in the way we see it that this is a temporary result. Perhaps an inspiring model, but not the end result, not a permanent objective. Love cannot be cultivated by will or logic. Love is cultivated by allowing it to accumulate naturally as the seeker continues to seek, continues to give thanks, and continues to point his or herself ever towards the light. In this way, love arises naturally. And when love arises naturally and fills the heart, and the mind lets go of its judgments and turns itself over to faith and true service is performed, this is not easy. It is not something one can achieve by practicing this or that skill, but that which will come as it will. Come with patience and dedication to the task of being a servant of the light.
Yeah. Letting the heart lead the way is so essential. Um, and specifically, I've had one experience where even in my daily review, I couldn't figure. I felt the emotions and I tried to apply logic, and I I just couldn't come up with the answer. So I just decided just do what feels right in the moment with my heart leading the way. And specifically, so at this gas station with a lot of homeless, right? They recently put up a sign saying, "Please do not assist or help the panhandlers because of the safety concerns to the patrons." Right? And I was like, man, on the one hand, it's absolutely true that the more homeless there are in a given area, there's some associated crime levels with that, right? And that assisting, you're certain in a certain sense, you're reinforcing more homeless coming to this gas station if you're giving them money or food, right? But then I was like, man, but just it feels like the human thing to do, right? On occasion. But then again, I'm buying stuff willingly at this gas station, so maybe, and this is probably a social norm or legalistic interpretation. So maybe do I have a duty to accept their desires in place of my own. So I logically, I don't have a conclusion to what is the right or wrong thing. I was just like, I'm just gonna play it by ear and just try to be as loving as possible and act from the heart in the moment. And if it feels right and it has felt right afterwards to give money to the panhandlers, and I do, you know.
Oh, I have no faith in institutions, governments, organizations being able to tell me what is service and what isn't.
Yeah.
In that way, I am pretty radical. I think breaking the law is an awesome thing.
No, it is. It is. But
No, I'm dead serious.
but there, I felt, at least for me, because I do see cases like this, there is a legitimate security, not security, criminal, aspect of increased crime in areas with more homeless. Like because I get cases like that, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, it's yeah,
I'm not responsible for every incidence of crime.
right.
Uh, I would hazard a guess that the convenience store has very little control over it either.
Yeah.
Like the idea that I just think it's a false argument. Like the whole thing's just a way to try to not have homeless people around. That's all it is.
No, I totally think that's probably why they put the sign up, for sure.
Yeah. So screw them. I'm the one who has to make a decision in the moment,
Right.
not the manager of that store that's making all the money off of us.
Yeah, and it's funny because the people who actually work at the store, they don't care about, they don't enforce the sign either.
No, of course not, because it's ridiculous. It just shows how what Ra said in that one session about how law is at once a desire to free people from chaos, but at the same time, it also puts people in a prison necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Too much order is very negative.
That's very true.
Now, too little order has potential to be greatly destabilizing and chaotic, and also a place where service itself can thrive. So we have to we have to do the Goldilocks route for service to others, right? Not too hot, not too cold.
I love these analogies.
All right. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that? I do think that it's interesting to think of service as something that just happens. It's not something that you carefully think about and then do. It doesn't mean that when you give thought to it that it's not service. It means that what you're looking for is that dynamic of being that window that the light is shining through. And that will always happen in the moment.
Right. And if it's not flowing in the moment, at least in my experience, you can't just have brainstorm something in the moment and then figure it out and let it flow. It usually doesn't work that way,
Yeah. Keep in mind, and I think this is a big takeaway for this whole session. We think of service as something where the recipient of the service is the subject. But actually we're the subject. What we choose to do with the free offering of service, how we choose to deal with the effects of that is what gives us something to work on. In a way, we're never serving another. We're always just serving the Creator and helping ourselves. We are trying to figure out how to be better channels of love and light. And service has the fantastic capability to bring situations where we see that clearly to light.
So one phrase I like to use that really helps me, and I know it can be controversial, is to think of service to others as service to all. Now, without getting into whether that's technically right or wrong, I do think it captures a lot of what the service to other path is about, right? It's because it's the service is physically maybe interacting with someone else, but there's really energetically things going on for both people.
Right. Yeah. The service is just the thing. The service is just the kinetic thing that catches our eye. We're always trying to be better representatives of the Creator. We're trying to be better mirrors to other people. There's all these different ways in which we are trying to bring about a situation where service can occur. And I think it's interesting because in other Confederation channelings, they talk about how service is really just the character of an entire creation that where there are no separations, there are no divisions, interacting. If everything was one, then service and love would be the closest thing we could get to in a creation of separation that would reflect that underlying unity. So we're
Absolutely.
going for that underlying unity. Just keep that in mind. That means making sure that you are taking care of yourself, making sure that you are taking care of your duties, making sure that you are there for the other in the moment that you cannot anticipate.
The way I see it is heart-based love is unconditional. And if you're putting conditions on everyone but yourself, that's not unconditional.
Yes. Yes. All right. So jumping back in, we are those of Kuo and are again with this instrument. We greet each one again in love and light. Dear sisters and brothers, gaze within and gaze at the Creator. Gaze into the eyes of another and gaze at the Creator. Gaze at the trees, at the sky, the water, the winds that blow, and gaze at the Creator. Within third density entities such as yourselves, you are, spiritually speaking, experiencing in your incarnation a series of energy expenditures. These expenditures of energy must be polarized in order to gain power and to do work, spiritually speaking. The nature of polarity is the nature of opposites. To do work in a polarized fashion, you may polarize in a positive sense by allowing energy expenditures to occur with the intention of serving those with whom you exchange energy. You gain power in a polarized negative fashion by setting the intention of exchanging energy with others by manipulating them in accordance with your desire. Each of those to whom we speak of at this time wishes to exchange energy with the intention of seeing the Creator, honoring, loving, respecting, and being one with the Creator in those whom you meet. The essence of being of service to others is the fundamental realization that all are one. In serving another, you are serving the one infinite Creator. Consequently, service to others, stripped of content in an outer sense, is the meeting of Creator to Creator, with no separation, no evasion, no fear, and no distance. When you gaze into another's eyes, no matter what that entity has asked of you, and you are aware of no distance between you, but only the reflection of love in love, you are being of service to that other self to the full extent of your ability to do so. You may have no money. You may have no time. You may have only this one moment to exchange energy in service to that other entity. Yet when you gaze fearlessly into his eyes and love him and allow the love of the infinite Creator to pour through you as if you were a stained glass window and let it illumine the expenditure of your energy, you have satisfied the work of polarity in that moment. I don't have a lot to add.
It's a very powerful thing to acknowledge a homeless person. And in general, it's actually even more powerful, I've noticed, to such an extent that I actually avoid it typically, to actually make real eye contact with someone. Like, I actually feel the energy when I do that. Like, I'm talking about not just looking at them, but like looking into their eye. It's a very powerful energetic exchange that occurs.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the essence of the vulnerability that each of us feel in this crazy illusion that just drowns us in like self-awareness and the awkwardness of being a body in a place in a society that doesn't seem to like honor us as human beings only if we have money to be human beings, you know?
Right.
So I think the instruction that Kuo gives on polarity is interesting. That one hallmark of kind of evaluating your service is you allow this energy to flow. You allow these energy expenditures. And when I hear energy expenditure, I can't help but think in terms of the archetypal mind, because they call the archetypal mind the blueprint of all possible energy expenditures, right? So when we talk about the archetypal mind in normal life, what we're talking about is getting down to these purified emotions, these distilled like feeling states and conceptual states that are very, very deep. And we're trying to have our service, our action, our speech of the moment come from that level. And it is only by seeing another creator that you're really going to be able to act in that way with a full heart. If you're doing it for somebody who you have judgment of, it's probably not going to come off very well.
But
And
you
just
know,
remember that when you want to manipulate things, when you're looking for a certain outcome, you have the telltale sign of service to self in there.
sure. And often that desire for manipulation and control comes from really embracing, actually, in a certain sense, embracing and reinforcing your fears, insecurities, and expectations, building them up such that you wish to manipulate it so you don't have to face them, frankly.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, and just I think there's another hint in here that like being spiritually powerful probably will be socially awkward. It probably will run against the grain. Um, like we have to be able to be, in a certain sense, balanced and accepting of ourselves, so that we can do what we need, what we feel the Creator wants done, and not what you know somebody on Twitter would think it's the right thing to do.
Another way to look at it is that societal norms are the middle of the pack, and the outliers of society, who might be people um, who are looked down upon, so to speak, but also people who have done great things for society are outliers, and they're often their ideas and beliefs and what they wish to do were often considered crazy. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but since they talked about basically Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus, and Martin Luther King Jr., they were outliers. They were not. They did not fit within the norms, and they're examples of service to others. So it absolutely makes sense that if you're fitting in 100%, maybe there's still some more work to be done on the service to others path, because our society is not set up in a service to others fashion.
I will not rule out the possibility that a very charismatic and charming service to others individual could always be seen well, no matter how much he's bucking trends to
That's
serve
true.
others. I just think that I don't know those guys and they don't hang out with me. So it's a complete figment of my imagination at this point.
If you're out there, contact
Yeah.
Jeremy.
No, man, let's hang out.
He's ready to interview on this podcast.
I just want to get a selfie with you. Maybe a little bit of a rub off on me. All right, so we're past the main message here, and then there are questions. And I skipped over questions that weren't relevant to this topic, but I do think that there's something in here that one of the junior channels asks that's very helpful. I know we're getting a little crazy on time here, but let's just see if we can get this out there. So they ask, I would like to know what the metaphysical purposes are behind not divulging certain spiritual practices in which one is engaging to other people in order to make them more effective. What I mean by this is not discussing them with other people because somehow that limits their spiritual effectiveness. Please comment on this. And Kuo says, there is that within any seeker that wishes to be transparently and fully honest at all times, to the extent of revealing any and all things that one is doing. However, we would observe that such entities are not generally as concerned with service to others as they are concerned with the outpouring of their personal myth. The energy is not how may I serve you, but how may I reveal myself and make myself feel good. There are natural boundaries that become apparent to one who truly wishes to serve others between the self as it is to its full extent and content, and the self which is understandable by and acceptable to another. The cause of this natural boundary, when a lack of congruency exists between the self and another, is obvious to the self. That entity who wishes to serve another will focus not on revealing the self, but on supporting, encouraging, and respecting the other self. It becomes unimportant to be understood, to be accepted, to be consoled. It becomes important only to accept, to love, and to console the other. Thusly, it is not that the self denigrates the self or seeks to be dishonest, but rather that when one lifts up from attention to the self and puts the substantial focus of its attention and regard upon the other side, thusly the service to others entity may listen without the need to bring the self into the equation. And if the self is brought into the equation, there is a natural process which goes on, in which those things about the self which are true and shall not be a stumbling block to the other are shared. And those things which are true but would constitute a stumbling block to the other are not shared. And both transactions are done in love. Now, the person, did you want to comment on this, Nithin?
Do you actually know what? I'm curious. Do you know what spiritual practice is actually the basis of this question? I mean, because there's many things that are out there that could give rise to this question.
Well, yeah, it is a little bit unclear. I think what they're talking about is, should you make it an attempt when you're serving to kind of clue them into what you think is really going on? In other words, all the stuff that we just talked about with respect to service, about it being an opportunity to work on the self, about it being an opportunity for creator to meet creator, about it being an opportunity to mirror, all of these spiritual principles that we take into account when we are in the real world, should we make that plainer? Or is it somehow dishonest to not come clean about what we're doing?
Okay, interesting. I wasn't thinking along those terms. I was thinking about more practices like invoking or praying, and invoking your spirit guides, stuff that not everyone would be open to discussing or being informed about. I'm not saying like that's something really I do that often. I kind of go about it a different way, but
I think we're talking about the same thing. The question is, when you're serving, should you make yourself the center of attention?
Well, the answer to that is definitely no. For multiple reasons. So obviously it's not helpful for your own distortions. But there's also some sort of weird feedback that Ra talks about, specifically when you're providing a healing service, that the credit has to go to the creator. And I think there's examples of this when I think Jesus heals people to give credit to the creator. But it's this concept that if you take credit for something, not only does it probably build your own distortions, but it actually changes physically. I think at least in healing contexts, what happens. Like there's almost, I think in healing contexts, there's like a transference situation supposedly that goes on. I don't really engage in like those. I don't have experience doing healing practices with others, so I don't know personally, but that's what I've heard.
Well, the idea is that when you're healing from a law of one point of view, what you want the person to believe is that they are the creator and that the creator healed them.
Right.
And that there's no distance between those two things.
Right.
When they are at their healthiest, there's no distance between the idea of the healer and the healed. They become
exactly
one.
Exactly.
And that the human doing the healing is a conduit for the rediscovery of that relationship.
Right.
So if you're saying, no, actually me, the healer, I'm the one doing this, then you're frustrating that unity that is the source of all of that health.
Right. And also at a more, I guess, also common level that I see frequently, and this is true even among spiritual people, is there's a distortion of I'm spiritual, but I can't do anything myself. Like my guru, my spirit guides, other people are the ones to do this. And so when they are helped by someone else, and really, even Ron talks about this, that if a healer heals someone who's healed, it's the creator in each other, and it has to be someone who's ready to be healed, right? The healer can't just force their healing upon someone who, even if they're seeking healing, is not ready to be healed, right? So ultimately, healing comes from within, right? The self is the creator. But if you have this idea or this distortion that you can't do anything yourself, it's like this almost like victimhood mentality. You're powerless. Everyone else has to help you out, and you have to constantly call upon aid. It blocks the flow of love. It's another distortion.
It does. But remember, power is conceived of by a service to others entity in a very different way than a service to self entity, right?
Right.
Remember, things do not come to positive entities, but through them,
Exactly.
according to the Ra.
Exactly.
So a service to others entity understands that, like I said, they are just the proximate transmission agent.
Right.
For something that's greater than the recipient of the the recipient of the service and the ostensible provider of the service, right?
I guess to reword what I was saying, it's the idea that basically a person doesn't have that connection to the creator directly, right? They're always saying that someone else, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this passage, and I think they're going to get into a little bit of clarification in just a bit, um, like I have run into the kind of thing that they're talking about, that I think they're talking about here. Maybe that's why I have the interpretation I do. Um, there are times when I'm relating to somebody and I start to pepper in straight up Confederation stuff, and I can feel it getting in the way.
Yes.
We have a connection, but I need the reinforcing of saying, no, I'm actually doing this. And I want you to know that I'm doing this. That's not about the other person. That's about me and me wanting for my service to register in some way, to be to reinforce me in some way. And that's not good. That's why I like the metaphor of us all being secret agents for love, right?
It is. It's
The
a.
whole point is we don't divulge what our true
Where do you get these
motives are.
metaphors, dude? Like they're awesome.
I just accumulated them. I went to the same homecomings you did, man.
That's funny.
Yeah. There was one thing that I think kind of contradicted something we said earlier, and I wanted to
Okay.
just take a second for that. They say that entity who wishes to serve another will focus not on revealing the self, but on supporting, encouraging, and respecting the other self. It becomes unimportant to be understood, to be accepted, and to be consoled. It becomes important only to accept, to love, and to console the other. I want to be clear that, like, my interpretation of that is that we're talking about the moment of service. In that interaction that you're having with another, you're not putting the emphasis on yourself and your own spiritual path. You're not taking all the things we're saying and showing them to the other person, being like, hey, look, I'm actually helping myself. I'm actually polarizing, because there's this thing called polarization, that I'm unifying with the creator because, hey, guess what? We're all separate. And look at how good I am at returning. No, that's not what you're doing. You can console yourself and get some sort of feedback that you're looking for from your inner self another time.
Right.
That's for the evening of reflection and balancing distortions. It is not for the moment. In the moment, you are there for that person, and you're being the most faithful mirror and faithful servant that you can be.
Agree 100%.
When you're at your best, like I said, I've gotten confused before. Like,
Yeah,
it's confusing. All of this stuff is confusing.
yes, I feel like it can't be understated to the listener that we both screw this up all the time.
All
I mean,
the time.
you know, we do put it into practice a lot of time, but there's more than a few instances where we're like, okay, we didn't do that.
No, Nithin, I suck. It's just that I understand. I feel like I have a little bit of understanding of why I suck, and it gives me like a starting point from which I have nothing to lose by trying to be better. And that's the thing. It's like you wish to be better, but if you put too much emphasis on being a better servant, now you're putting all the emphasis on yourself. It's this dance that you're doing. Because remember, we are trying to almost emulate and symbolize in our lives our highest values. And the highest of the high values is the unity of all things. So what unity looks like in any given situation, projected into this 3D like chaos illusion, is going to look very different, because the way the shadows dance when we project, you can't know. All you can do is you can give it your heartfelt best and trust that you are tapping into something. And then reflect and see, did I actually do that? What got in the way? Not as a way to judge yourself and to chastise yourself, but as a way to understand yourself, so that you can be a better servant. It's in the understanding of yourself, not in the manipulation of yourself, but in the understanding that you will serve better. All right. So the person who asked this question wants clarification. They say, I think you understood my question, but I don't think I understood your answer. Are you saying that revealing your particular practice to another is not so much harming the metaphysical consequences of your practice to yourself, but might be a stumbling block to another self because you are putting your own biases on to them, or revealing your own ego and saying, I am so great? And Kuo says, we believe we understand your confusion, my sister. When there is another whom you feel is able to grasp, without distortion, the content of your spiritual practice, it is quite satisfying and very loving to share that practice in full. However, many of those who have a spiritual practice have gained a great deal of power. There is a tremendous amount behind the simple discussion of spiritual practice. It is power that often is not congruent with the basic setting of one who asks concerning your spiritual practice. Consequently, it is not helpful or even understandable to that entity to take that entity through a full discussion of your practice. In those situations, we were suggesting that when you are aware of when there is a lack of congruency betwixt the self and the other, and that query is put to you, you step into the possibility of the energy exchange between the self and the other, and that you limit your discussion to those points which shall be understandable and not a challenge to that other entity. Further, we were suggesting at such times when there is a lack of congruency betwixt the two of you in a fundamental energy sense, that is, when one is operating at a much higher amperage, shall we say, of power than the other, be very thoughtful to use that considerable amperage or intensity, if you will, in order to focus upon that other self and find ways to support and encourage the other's questioning process of spiritual practice or any other element that you truly have in common with that other entity, thereby giving that entity the full strength of your energy in a way that is comfortable and helpful to that entity.
It's very important to meet people where they are.
Bingo. That's all this. That's all they're saying. Meet people where they are. Don't try to pull them to you. You are catalyst in their seeking process. You don't have a good idea of where exactly they are. They need to do the work themselves. You can help inspire them. You can help by giving words of encouragement. You can help by giving physical aid and all sorts of different things that you can do that meet them on the terms that they can understand. But remember, whatever technique or spiritual quote unquote practice you're doing is not nearly as important as the love you are bringing to the situation. To the extent that those spiritual practices are talking about them, get in the way of that love, they are a detriment. They are taking away from your ability to serve. And this is why, listener, you need to understand yourself. You need to have an ongoing practice of inquiring into the mystery that is yourself and to understand those things that make you need to be acknowledged, that make you need to be respected and make you need to have all of this like affirmation and validation from without.
Depending on the age of the listener, I think it's also these days, it's just really hard growing up in a place where everyone's on Instagram, and that need for validation. I think that carries over into other practices as well. So it can be very difficult.
Yeah. There's such a thing as new age influencers. And
yes, there is.
That's a topic for another time. But what I would say is that there are a lot of personalities out there that make the spiritual path seem very whimsical and like everything just fits together and everything flows and it's perfect. And I am not here to give you any illusions about that. Life is tough. It's not a sign of weakness for you to accept and acknowledge that it's tough. But what you can do is you can start to have a practice with yourself where you check in and you have some curiosity about what the self that is in this crazy world is going through and become good friends with yourself. And when you become good friends with yourself, you can be good friends to other people, even total strangers.
It's once again recognizing the creator in yourself so that you can recognize the creator in others.
Yeah. And I will say it is a skill, hard one, to be able to connect with people and just be able to have a conversation with them, just being able to like relate to them, even if you don't have a lot in common. It's not always going to happen. And sometimes it will feel awkward, but you don't put anything on your plate that you can't handle, because remember, you programmed all this before you were born. So trust that your life is unfolding in a series of lessons that are for your benefit, that are designed to help you. They aren't designed to drive you crazy. They're designed to help you grow. And the more that you identify with a greater self, and the more that you inquire into that self through the process of meditation and reflection and balancing, clearing the chakras, all sorts of things that you can do on your own with nobody else around, the more you can be there for other people and be yourself. And you'll find, I guarantee you this, that the more that you are able to serve others in that true loving way, not about what you do, but how you are when you do it, the more that you will learn about yourself. And the more that you learn about yourself, the more you will go into those situations of service, being able to feel free, not feeling like, oh, now I got to serve somebody, but feeling like, yay, I get to serve somebody.
Yeah, just letting the love flow.
Yep. All right. All right, Nithin, I think we're going to wrap this up. I think that's about all the time we can ask anybody to listen to a podcast.
It was a good discussion. I think I really liked this session, so thank you for
I
the opportunity.
thank you for joining me on such short notice too, because I really wanted to get something in before I left, and I really liked this one. I just read this like the other day and really wanted to talk about it. And frankly, I don't think I even scratched the surface of what's really underneath here.
There's a
But
lot.
we're gonna have to leave it here. And there's like 1,600 other sessions. So,
Nice.
well, thanks again, Nithin, for joining me. Thanks, listener, for checking us out again. As always, we would love your feedback. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, you can go to inaudible.show, and there's a contact form right there. In the meantime, stay in the love and light.